History class taught you names. Pythagoras, King Arthur, Marco Polo, solid facts, right? Except some of these historical figures have less evidence for their existence than Santa Claus. We're talking philosophers who might be mascots for ancient cults, saints the Vatican quietly removed from the calendar, and national heroes borrowed from Viking myths. These are 33 famous people from your textbooks who probably never existed at all. 1. Betty Crocker is arguably the most successful imaginary woman in American history. For decades, people wrote her heartfelt fan letters. Some men actually sent her marriage proposals. Women asked for her cooking advice like she was a trusted friend. The thing is, Betty was nothing more than a painting commissioned by the Washburn-Crosby Company, which later became General Mills back in 1921. They needed a friendly female name to sign responses to customer questions, so they held a contest among female employees for the best signature. The name Crocker came from a recently retired director, and Betty just sounded approachable. Her portrait has been updated 8 times since then to keep her looking modern. She has received fan mail addressed to her personally for over 100 years. People genuinely mourned when her look changed. An entire generation formed an emotional bond with a corporate mascot, and honestly, that might be the most American thing ever. 2. Pythagoras, the man responsible for the triangle theorem that haunted your school years, might not have been a real person at all, or at least not the genius we imagine. Here's the deal. Pythagoras supposedly founded a secretive religious cult in ancient Greece that worshipped numbers, believed in reincarnation, and had a bizarre and intense hatred of beans. Seriously, they thought beans contained human souls. The problem is that Pythagoras himself left behind 0 writings. Everything we know about him comes from followers who wrote centuries after his supposed death. Many historians now suspect the Pythagoreans invented their founder to give their weird mathematical religion a respectable figurehead. The theorem that bears his name. The Babylonians knew it 1,000 years earlier, so you might have spent your teenage years cursing a man who was essentially a mascot for a bean-fearing math cult. Let that sink in. 3. Jack the Ripper terrorized London in 1888 and became the world's first celebrity serial killer. The murders in Whitechapel were absolutely real. 5 women, possibly more, were killed in horrific ways. But Jack himself? He was likely a media invention. The name came from a letter sent to a news agency, almost certainly written by a journalist looking to boost sales. The police at the time suspected the letter was a hoax. Victorian newspapers were locked in brutal circulation wars, and nothing sold papers like a mysterious villain with a catchy name. So they created one. The truth is probably far less cinematic. The murders may have been committed by multiple people or by someone far more ordinary than the caped monster the press invented. Jack the Ripper was essentially the first true crime clickbait, a brand designed to terrify and entertain a public hungry for sensation. The legend outlived any real killer by about a century. 4. Mulan is one of history's most beloved warrior women. Disney made a fortune off her story. The problem? She almost certainly never existed. Mulan comes from a Chinese poem called The Ballad of Mulan, written sometime around the 5th or 6th century. It's a beautiful story about a girl who disguises herself as a man to take her elderly father's place in the army. But that's all it is, a poem, a piece of literature, not a historical record. Chinese imperial archives, which documented practically everything, contain 0 mention of her. No military records, no family records, nothing. Historians have searched for centuries and found exactly nothing. She's in the same category as Cinderella or Snow White, a folk heroine whose story resonated so deeply that people wanted her to be real. And honestly, the poem is fantastic. But wanting something to be true and it being true are very different things. 5. George P. Burdell is the most accomplished fictional person in American higher education. In 1927, a Georgia Tech student named William Edgar Smith received 2 enrollment forms by mistake. Instead of returning the extra one, he invented George P. Burdell and enrolled him as a student. Then things got completely out of hand. Smith and his friends did George's homework. They took his exams. George graduated with a bachelor's degree, then a master's degree. During World War II, George was drafted and somehow logged over 50 combat missions. He was listed on the board of directors for Mad Magazine. He almost became Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 2001 after an online voting campaign. Georgia Tech has embraced him as an official mascot. He has a Facebook page with thousands of followers. George P. Burdell started as a prank by a bored college kid and became a century-long institution. That's a better career than most real people manage. 6. King Arthur is the ultimate British legend. The Noble King, the Round Table, the Sword and the Stone, Camelot, all of it feels so real that people have spent centuries searching for his castle. But Arthur almost certainly never existed as a single person. The earliest mentions of him are vague references in Welsh poems and histories written hundreds of years after he supposedly lived. No contemporary records mention him at all. Most historians believe Arthur is either a composite figure, a blend of several minor warlords who fought the Saxons, or simply a myth that grew with each retelling. Every generation added more details. The Round Table showed up in French romances. Lancelot was a French invention too. Merlin came from Welsh mythology. Arthur is basically a medieval cinematic universe, a franchise built by different writers over 500 years. The real Arthur might have been three guys or no guys or just a really good campfire story that got way out of control. 7. Saint Christopher is the patron saint of travelers, and if you've ever seen a medal dangling from a rearview mirror, that's him. Medieval art often depicted him as a giant who carried the Christ child across a river, and sometimes, bizarrely, with the head of a dog. Yes, a literal dog head. The Eastern Orthodox tradition claimed he came from a tribe of dog-headed people. The Catholic Church grew increasingly uncomfortable with Christopher over the centuries because there's basically zero historical evidence he ever existed. In 1969, the Vatican quietly removed him from the general Roman calendar, which is the Church's polite way of saying, "We're not sure this guy was real." He wasn't declared fake, just demoted to optional veneration. Millions of travelers still carry his medal for protection, praying to a saint the Church itself isn't confident existed. If that's not a fascinating commentary on faith versus history, nothing is. 8. Sun Tzu is the legendary author of The Art of War. That book every business bro and self-help guru loves to quote. Know your enemy. All warfare is deception. Great stuff. But Sun Tzu himself is historically sketchy. Traditional accounts place him as a general serving the king of Wu around 500 BC, but contemporary records from that period don't mention him. The earliest biography was written centuries later and is full of legendary embellishments. Many historians now believe The Art of War isn't the work of one military genius, but a compilation of strategic wisdom from multiple Chinese generals assembled over generations. The name Sun Tzu might have been attached later to give the collection authority, so every time someone quotes Sun Tzu in a business meeting, they might be quoting a committee. Which honestly explains why the advice is sometimes contradictory. It's not one genius. It's a greatest hits album from ancient China's military thinkers. 9. Tokyo Rose was the seductive voice of Japanese propaganda during World War II, broadcasting to American troops in the Pacific with demoralizing messages and American music. GIs both hated and loved her. The problem is, Tokyo Rose wasn't one woman. She was at least a dozen different English-speaking women who worked for Radio Tokyo during the war. American soldiers just assumed it was one sultry-voiced enemy seductress because that made a better story. After the war, the US government desperately wanted to prosecute Tokyo Rose, so they pinned everything on one woman, Eva Toguri, an American citizen stranded in Japan. She was convicted of treason despite flimsy evidence and served 6 years in prison. Decades later, witnesses admitted they'd been pressured to lie. She was pardoned in 1977. The real crime? America manufactured a single villain out of a group of women because one enemy is easier to hate than a complicated truth. Tokyo Rose was a collective fiction turned into one woman's nightmare. 10. Homer is credited with creating Western literature itself, writing the Iliad and the Odyssey, the foundational texts of Greek civilization. The traditional image is a blind poet wandering ancient Greece, reciting epic tales from memory. It's a beautiful picture, and it's probably wrong. The Homeric question has tortured scholars for centuries. Did one person write both poems? Did Homer exist at all? The poems show signs of being compiled over centuries, with different sections having different styles. Many academics believe Homer was not one person but a brand name, a collective identity for a guild of oral poets who refined these stories over generations. The name might have been attached to give the poems a single author because ancient audiences, like modern ones, preferred a genius to a committee. So the greatest author in Western history might be a placeholder name for centuries of anonymous storytelling. Not one blind man, but a whole tradition wearing a mask. 11. Pope Joan is one of history's most scandalous legends. According to the story, a woman disguised herself as a man, rose through the church hierarchy, and became pope sometime around the 9th century. Her secret was only revealed when she gave birth during a papal procession through Rome. The crowd was not pleased. The Catholic Church has always denied Pope Joan existed, calling the story Protestant slander or medieval satire. And they're probably right. There's no contemporary evidence for her, and the papal records from that period are fairly complete. But here's the weird part. The legend persisted for centuries, and many medieval Catholics believed it. Some accounts claim the church installed a special chair with a hole in the seat to verify future popes were male. That chair actually existed, though its purpose was probably ceremonial. Pope Joan is almost certainly fiction, but she's fiction that says something fascinating about medieval anxieties around gender, power, and the church. 12. Paul Bunyan, the giant lumberjack with his blue ox Babe, feels like ancient American folklore. He's not. Paul Bunyan was invented by an advertising copywriter named William Loughead in 1916 to sell lumber for the Red River Lumber Company. There were some scattered tall tales about a Paul Bunyan in logging camps before this, but Loughead created the character as we know him, the giant stature, Babe the blue ox, the impossible feats. It was a marketing campaign. The stories were so successful that people assumed they were genuine folk legends passed down through generations. Academics actually studied Paul Bunyan as authentic folklore before discovering the advertising origins. America's most famous folk hero is essentially a corporate mascot who got promoted to mythology. He's in the same category as Betty Crocker, except he's selling lumber instead of cake mix. The American dream is apparently being invented by an ad agency and becoming immortal. 13. William Shakespeare is the most famous writer in the English language, but for centuries, some people have refused to believe he actually wrote those plays. The anti-Stratfordian theory suggests the real Shakespeare was someone else entirely, probably a nobleman who couldn't be seen writing lowbrow theater. Candidates include Francis Bacon, the Earl of Oxford, and Christopher Marlowe. The argument goes like this. The man from Stratford had only a grammar school education, his parents and children were illiterate, and he left behind no books or manuscripts. How could he write with such knowledge of law, foreign courts, and aristocratic life? Mainstream scholars reject this conspiracy almost unanimously, pointing out that grammar school education in Elizabethan England was rigorous, and that Shakespeare's plays actually contain plenty of errors about aristocratic life. But the conspiracy refuses to die because, apparently, we just can't accept that a small-town kid with no connections became the greatest writer ever. It offends our sense of how success should work. 14. Ned Ludd was supposedly the leader of the Luddites, the English workers who smashed industrial machinery in the early 1800s to protest automation taking their jobs. Workers would break into factories at night, destroy the new machines, and sign threatening letters to factory owners with Ned Ludd or General Ludd. The thing is, Ned Ludd never existed. He was a fictional figurehead, an imaginary boss the workers invented to organize their movement without any single leader being caught. Some stories say the name came from a young apprentice named Ned Ludlam who once smashed a stocking frame in frustration, but even that origin is probably a legend. The Luddites created a fake general to lead their rebellion because a movement with no identifiable leader is much harder to crush. It's actually brilliant organizational strategy. The authorities spent years hunting for Ned Ludd while he was sitting comfortably in the realm of pure fiction. General Ludd won by not existing. 15. Ragnar Lodbrok is the most famous Viking who might never have existed. Thanks to the TV show Vikings, everyone knows him. The legendary warrior who raided Paris, fathered famous sons, and died dramatically in a snake pit. The problem is the historical record is a mess. The sagas credit Ragnar with accomplishments spread across several decades and multiple regions, feats that no single human lifespan could contain. He supposedly raided Paris in 845, but also died in England years earlier according to other accounts. Historians now believe Ragnar Lodbrok is probably a composite figure, a Frankenstein's monster stitched together from 3 or 4 different Viking chieftains whose legends merged over time. The sons attributed to him, like Ivar the Boneless and Bjorn Ironside, probably existed but likely had different fathers. Ragnar became the Viking Everyman, a brand name for cool stuff Vikings did, rather than an actual person who did any of it. 16. Nicholas Bourbaki was one of the most influential mathematicians of the 20th century. Starting in the 1930s, he published groundbreaking papers and textbooks that reshaped modern mathematics. Universities invited him to speak. Journals published his work. The only problem? Nicholas Bourbaki was a prank. He was actually a group of young French mathematicians who decided to write collaboratively under a fake name. They invented an entire biography for Bourbaki, claiming he was a reclusive Russian genius. They even tried to submit an obituary for him to a mathematical society when they wanted to retire the character. The joke went on for decades. Bourbaki's textbooks are still used today and considered classics. His influence on mathematics is completely real, even though he isn't. It's probably the most successful academic prank in history, a fake person who genuinely shaped an entire field. Mathematics got trolled by a group of French students, and the troll won. 17. Robin Hood is England's favorite outlaw, the prince of thieves who stole from the rich and gave to the poor. Except history cannot find him anywhere. There are scattered medieval references to a Robin Hood or Robin Hood, but they're contradictory and vague. Some place him in the 1100s, others in the 1300s. Some say Sherwood Forest, others say Barnesdale. The earliest ballads don't even mention Maid Marian or Friar Tuck. Most historians believe Robin Hood is a composite character, an amalgamation of every medieval outlaw, poacher, and rebel who annoyed local authorities. The name became a catch-all for heroic criminal. Poor peasants projected their fantasies of resistance onto this vague figure, and storytellers kept adding details over centuries. Robin Hood isn't one man. He's a wish, a collective dream of fighting back against injustice. The reason nobody can find him is because he's everywhere and nowhere, a symbol rather than a person. 18. Saint Valentine is the patron saint of love, the reason we buy chocolates and cards every February. But the actual Saint Valentine, or rather Saint's Valentine, is a historical mess. The Catholic Church recognizes at least 3 different martyrs named Valentine or Valentinus, all supposedly killed by Romans. None of their stories involve romance. One was a priest, one was a bishop, and one is just a name with no story attached. The Romantic Association was basically invented by Geoffrey Chaucer in the 14th century, who linked Valentine's feast day with birds mating. That's it. That's the entire romantic connection. The church has admitted they have no idea if any of these Valentines were real, and in 1969, they removed his feast day from the general Roman calendar. So the Saint of Love might be fictional, his romantic association was invented by a medieval poet, and the entire holiday is built on foundations of pure legend. Happy Valentine's Day. 19. Confucius probably existed. There was likely a teacher named Kong Qiu in ancient China around 500 BC, but the Confucius we know the wise sage spouting perfect aphorisms, might be largely a literary invention. The Analects, the book of Confucius's sayings, was compiled by his followers long after his death, and scholars debate how much of it reflects his actual words versus later additions. His biography grew more legendary with each century. By the Han Dynasty, Confucius had become a semi-divine figure, the perfect sage who never made mistakes. Modern historians struggle to separate the historical teacher from the mythological creation that grew around him. Many of the Confucius says quotes that circulate today aren't in the Analects at all. They're modern inventions or fortune cookie wisdom falsely attributed to him. The real Confucius is buried under layers of legend so thick that finding him is almost impossible. He exists, but barely. 20. Baron Munchausen was based on a real person, Carl Friedrich Hieronymus, Freiherr von Munchausen, an 18th-century German nobleman who served in the Russian military and was known for telling wildly exaggerated stories about his adventures. But the character in the famous stories, the baron who rides cannonballs, travels to the moon, and pulls himself out of a swamp by his own hair, is pure fiction created by a writer named Rudolf Erich Raspe. Raspe published the tales anonymously in 1785, and they became wildly popular. The real Munchausen was furious. His reputation was destroyed. He became known only as the Liar Baron and spent his remaining years bitter and reclusive. The fictional character completely consumed the real man. Today, nobody remembers the actual German nobleman. They only know the impossible cartoon version. Baron Munchausen is a case study in how fiction can murder reality, how a character can become so famous that the person it was based on simply disappears. 21. Helen of Troy had the face that launched 1,000 ships. The entire Trojan War supposedly started because Paris kidnapped her from her husband Menelaus. It's one of history's great romantic tragedies. Except archaeologists have found evidence that Troy was real and that a war did happen there around 1200 BC, but Helen herself is almost certainly mythological. The war was probably fought over trade routes and regional dominance, not a stolen queen. Helen might be a metaphor, a personification of the wealth and resources that made Troy worth attacking. Ancient writers loved giving abstract concepts human faces. We went to war over shipping rights doesn't make for great poetry, but we went to war over the most beautiful woman in the world does. Helen is probably Bronze Age propaganda, a story that made a brutal commercial war sound noble and romantic. The face that launched 1,000 ships might have been a trade agreement. 22. Uncle Sam is the personification of the United States. The guy on the recruitment posters pointing and saying, "I want you." The legend claims he was based on Samuel Wilson, a meatpacker from Troy, New York, who supplied barrels of beef to the U.S. Army during the War of 1812. Soldiers supposedly started calling the food Uncle Sam's because the barrels were stamped with U.S. It's a nice story. It's also probably exaggerated or completely invented. The Uncle Sam phrase appears in print before Wilson's alleged connection, and the iconic image we know, the tall man with the white beard and star-spangled hat, was created much later by various artists. The most famous version was drawn by James Montgomery Flagg for World War I recruitment posters, and Flagg admitted he based the face on himself. Uncle Sam is basically a government meme that evolved over a century, with Samuel Wilson's story attached retroactively to give the symbol a heartwarming origin. The truth is messier and more collaborative. 23. Euclid is called the father of geometry, and his book Elements was the standard mathematics textbook for over 2,000 years. But we know almost nothing about Euclid himself. We don't know when he was born, when he died, what he looked like, or anything about his personal life. The few anecdotes about him were written centuries after he supposedly lived and are probably fictional. Some historians have suggested Euclid might not be one person at all, but a pen name for a team of mathematicians working at the Library of Alexandria. The name Euclid means something like good glory in Greek, which sounds suspiciously like a pen name. The book Elements might be a collaborative compilation of mathematical knowledge attributed to a single convenient author. It's entirely possible that the most influential mathematics teacher in human history is just a brand name, a label slapped on the collected work of anonymous Greek math nerds. Geometry's founding father might be a committee. 24. Prester John was a legendary Christian king supposedly ruling a vast wealthy kingdom somewhere in the East, either in Africa or Asia. During the Crusades, European Christians became obsessed with finding him, believing he would help them defeat the Muslims and reclaim the Holy Land. A famous letter supposedly from Prester John circulated throughout Europe in the 12th century, describing his magical kingdom full of wonders. Popes sent envoys. Explorers searched. The Portuguese spent centuries looking for his kingdom in Africa. Nobody found him because he didn't exist. The letter was a forgery, probably created as propaganda to boost Crusader morale. Prester John was a fantasy, a wishful projection of European Christians who desperately wanted a powerful ally in their religious wars. The search for this fictional king actually influenced the Age of Exploration, as Europeans kept pushing into unknown territories hoping to find him. A fake king accidentally helped map the world. 25. Ossian was supposedly an ancient Scottish bard, a Celtic Homer whose epic poems were discovered by a man named James Macpherson in the 1760s. Macpherson published translations of Ossian's works, and Europe went absolutely insane for them. Napoleon carried them into battle. Goethe loved them. They influenced the entire Romantic movement. Thomas Jefferson considered them the greatest poetry ever written. There was just one problem. James Macpherson made them up. The poems were his own creations, not translations of ancient texts. When challenged to produce the originals, he couldn't. The forgery was eventually exposed, though Macpherson insisted until his death that the poems were genuine. Ossian influenced major literary movements, shaped how Europe understood Celtic culture, and inspired countless artists, and none of it was real. James Macpherson successfully fooled an entire continent for decades. The Scottish Homer was just a Scottish con artist with a talent for marketing and poetic plagiarism of himself. 26. William Tell is Switzerland's national hero, the crossbow marksman forced to shoot an apple off his son's head by a tyrannical Austrian governor. It's a powerful story of resistance and precision under pressure. The problem is the story appears in Norse legends centuries before Tell supposedly lived. Nearly identical tales exist in Danish and German folklore. The apple-shooting father is a wandering folk motif that got attached to Switzerland during their struggle for independence from the Habsburgs. Switzerland needed a hero, and they borrowed one from Viking mythology. There's no contemporary evidence William Tell existed. He first appears in chronicles written about 150 years after his alleged acts. Swiss historians have largely accepted he's legendary, though he remains a powerful national symbol. Countries create founding myths when they need them. America has George Washington and the cherry tree. Switzerland has William Tell and the apple. Both stories serve the same purpose, making national identity feel ancient and heroic, even when it isn't. 27. Laozi is the legendary founder of Taoism and the supposed author of the Tao Te Ching, one of the most influential philosophical texts in human history. The problem is, his name literally translates to Old Master or Old Teacher. That's not a name. That's a job description. It's like founding a religion and claiming the founder was named Mr. Wise Guy. Chinese historians have debated Laozi's existence for centuries. The earliest biography places him as a contemporary of Confucius, but that account was written hundreds of years later and is full of legendary elements. Some scholars believe Laozi was a real person whose biography became mythologized. Others believe he never existed, and Old Master was just a convenient attribution for collected Taoist wisdom. The Tao Te Ching itself might be a compilation from multiple authors. Taoism's founder might be a placeholder name for whoever wrote this stuff, which, if you think about it, is actually very Taoist. The master who cannot be named. 28. John Henry is the steel-driving man, the American folk hero who raced against a steam drill to prove human labor could beat machines and won, only to die with his hammer in his hand. It's a powerful legend about human dignity in the face of industrial automation. The problem is there's no solid evidence John Henry was real. Railroad companies kept detailed records of workers killed on the job, and no John Henry matches the legend. The story might be based on a real tunnel worker, or several workers whose identity was lost. Or it might be pure folklore, a symbolic tale that expressed workers' anxieties about being replaced by machines. Scholars have searched archives for over a century and found only maybes and possibilities. John Henry might be real, but he's more likely a collective creation, the steel-driving man representing every worker who feared the machine age. His power comes from the symbolism, not the biography. 29. Lycurgus was the legendary lawgiver of Sparta, the man who created all the institutions that made Sparta the militaristic society it became. The agage, the mess halls, the equality among citizens, all of it supposedly came from Lycurgus. Ancient Greeks treated him as a historical figure, but even they weren't sure when he lived, with estimates ranging over several centuries. Modern historians are deeply skeptical. Sparta probably didn't have one founding lawgiver. They likely invented Lycurgus to make their social system seem ancient, divinely ordained, and unchangeable. "We can't reform this law, Lycurgus made it 400 years ago," is a powerful argument against change. Every society that wants to preserve its traditions invents a founding father who established them. Lycurgus might be Sparta's way of making their brutal social experiment seem like eternal wisdom instead of political choice. He's a justification dressed up as a person. 30. Aesop is the man behind hundreds of fables featuring talking animals with moral lessons: the tortoise and the hare, the boy who cried wolf, the fox and the grapes. We attribute them all to Aesop, a Greek slave who supposedly lived around 600 BC. But Aesop himself is probably fictional, or at least heavily fictionalized. Ancient sources give contradictory accounts of his life, and his biography reads like a folk tale itself. He was supposedly ugly, possibly mute at first, and died by being thrown off a cliff by angry Delphians. The fables attributed to him come from various cultures and time periods. Some are older than Aesop supposedly was. Scholars believe Aesop became a convenient brand name to collect folk wisdom under one attribution. Ancient publishers needed an author, so they created one. The man who taught generations about honesty through talking animals might himself be the biggest fable of all. 31. The Queen of Sheba appears in the Bible, the Quran, and Ethiopian legends as a powerful monarch who visited King Solomon to test his wisdom with riddles. She brought incredible gifts and was impressed by his answers. It's a great story. Ethiopian tradition claims she had a son with Solomon, founding their royal dynasty. But archaeologists have found zero evidence of her existence or her specific kingdom. Sheba might refer to the Sabaean kingdom in Yemen, but no queen matching her description appears in their records. She might be a literary invention, a powerful female figure created to demonstrate Solomon's wisdom and the reach of his fame. Or she might be based on a real person whose records simply haven't survived. The Queen of Sheba remains one of history's most famous women, without any proof she was ever a real woman. She exists only in scripture and legend, somewhere between history and metaphor. 32. Romulus is the legendary founder of Rome who, along with his twin brother Remus, was abandoned as an infant and suckled by a wolf. He grew up to kill his brother, found Rome, and give the city his name. It's a fantastic origin story. It's also almost certainly fiction. Rome didn't spring from one founder in 753 BC. Archaeological evidence shows the site was occupied for centuries before and developed gradually. The Romans created Romulus because every great civilization needs a great origin story. The wolf symbolism, the fratricide, the divine ancestry from Mars, it's all myth-making designed to make Rome seem destined for greatness from birth. The story also conveniently justified Rome's violent expansion. If Rome was literally founded on brother killing brother, then conquering neighbors wasn't a betrayal of Roman values, but an expression of them. Romulus is propaganda, a founding myth that told Romans who they were and justified who they wanted to become. 33. Marco Polo wrote one of the most influential travel books in history, describing his supposed journey to China and his years serving Kublai Khan. His book inspired explorers for centuries. Columbus carried a copy. But some historians argue Marco Polo never made it to China at all. His account contains strange omissions. He never mentions the Great Wall. He never mentions tea. He never mentions chopsticks or foot binding or Chinese writing. These are enormous cultural features that any visitor would notice. Some scholars believe Polo only made it as far as Constantinople or Persia, where he collected stories from merchants who had actually traveled the Silk Road. He might have compiled their accounts and presented them as his own adventures. Others defend Polo, noting that the Great Wall wasn't prominent in his era and that his detailed descriptions of Mongol customs are remarkably accurate. The debate continues. History's most famous traveler might have been history's most famous armchair tourist, exploring the world from a comfortable seat in a Persian trading post. Turns out history's greatest characters might have better fictional backstories than most Marvel villains. Textbooks presented them as facts. Reality says otherwise. Now, genuine question. Which one of these shocks you the most? And which real historical figure do you secretly suspect is also completely made up? I want names. I want theories. Comment section is open for accusations. If this video just ruined your childhood education, a like and subscribe is the least you can do.